Chelsea Morgan believed she was protecting airline policy that morning. But within the hour, she would discover that the quiet woman she was about to embarrass in front of hundreds of travelers held more influence over the future of the company than anyone standing at that gate. Hello, everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It is quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Terminal C at Kennedy International Airport was already crowded when the first boarding announcements echoed across the departure hall. Travelers hurried between gates pulling rolling suitcases. Flight information screens glowed overhead. Coffee cups, laptops, and carry-on bags filled nearly every seat in the waiting area. It was the kind of busy morning when everyone seemed focused on getting somewhere important. Near Gate 42, passengers gathered in organized lines as airline staff prepared for the boarding process. Business travelers checked their watches. Families organized backpacks and passports. Frequent flyers stood confidently near the priority lane. In the middle of the crowd, a blonde woman wearing a cream cardigan over a navy blue shirt quietly approached the gate counter. Her name was Delaney Brooks. At 37 years old, she carried herself with calm confidence, though nothing about her appearance demanded attention. She carried a simple handbag and a small carry-on suitcase. There were no luxury accessories, no assistants, and no signs of wealth. To most people, she looked like an ordinary traveler heading to an ordinary destination. Standing behind the boarding counter was Chelsea Morgan. As the lead gate agent, she took pride in maintaining order and enforcing procedures. Years of dealing with difficult passengers had convinced her that she could usually identify problems before they happened. The moment her eyes landed on Delaney, something shifted. It was subtle at first. A quick glance at the cardigan. A brief look at the modest luggage. Then came the assumption. Delaney waited patiently until the previous passenger finished checking in. "Good morning," she said politely. "I am boarding flight 278. Chelsea extended her hand. "Boarding pass, please." Delaney handed over her mobile boarding pass. Chelsea scanned it and frowned almost immediately. The expression lasted only a second, but Delaney noticed it. Chelsea scanned again, then once more. "Please wait a moment," she said. Several nearby passengers glanced toward the counter. Delaney nodded calmly. "Of course." Chelsea studied the screen. Her eyebrows narrowed. "This is unusual." More travelers began paying attention. Airport delays and gate issues always attracted curiosity. Delaney remained composed. "Is there a problem?" "Possibly." Chelsea continued typing. "How did you obtain this boarding pass?" The question caught several people nearby off guard. Delaney blinked once. "Through the airline application." Chelsea looked unconvinced. "Interesting." The word carried a tone that felt less like a question and more like a judgment. Nearby passengers exchanged curious looks. A businessman standing in the priority boarding lane glanced toward Delaney before returning to his phone. A family seated near the window began watching openly. The atmosphere around the gate slowly changed. What should have been a routine boarding process was becoming something else entirely. Delaney kept her voice calm. "Can you tell me what seems to be wrong?" Chelsea looked back at the screen, then at Delaney. For a brief moment, a confident smile appeared on her face. It was the smile of someone who believed she had discovered something important. Then she said words that immediately caused several travelers to stop what they were doing and listen. "Ma'am, according to our system, you should not have access to this boarding authorization at all." The words immediately changed the atmosphere around Gate 42. Travelers who had been focused on their phones now looked up. A family seated near the window stopped talking altogether. Even the passengers waiting in the priority boarding lane began paying attention. Delaney Brooks remained calm despite the growing audience. "I do not understand," she said politely. The boarding pass came directly from the airline application. Chelsea Morgan folded her arms slightly and glanced at the screen again. "That is what makes this situation unusual." Her tone suggested she had already reached a conclusion. "The authorization attached to this reservation is restricted." Delaney frowned. "Restricted to whom?" "That is not information I am allowed to discuss." A few nearby travelers exchanged curious looks. One businessman quietly shook his head as if he had already decided that Delaney had somehow made a mistake. Another passenger whispered something to a companion, and both looked toward the counter. The public attention was growing by the minute. Delaney kept her voice steady. "There must be an explanation." "There usually is," Chelsea replied. "But sometimes the explanation is simpler than people want to admit." The comment carried an unmistakable edge. It implied that Delaney was responsible for whatever problem existed. A few passengers smiled knowingly. Social pressure had begun doing its work. People often trusted confidence more than facts. Nearby, Noah Reynolds stood near a customer service kiosk reviewing documents. He had noticed the exchange several minutes earlier. At first, he assumed it was a routine boarding issue. Now he was not so sure. The longer he watched, the more uncomfortable he became. Delaney was not acting like someone trying to bypass airline procedures. She was not defensive. She was not argumentative. She simply seemed confused. Chelsea turned the screen slightly away from public view. "May I see your identification?" Delaney immediately handed over her driver's license. Chelsea examined it carefully. "Delaney Brooks." "That is correct." Chelsea typed for several seconds. "And you purchased this ticket yourself?" "Yes." "Without assistance?" The question caused several people nearby to glance at one another. Delaney noticed the implication immediately. "Yes," she answered calmly. "I booked it personally." Chelsea nodded slowly, though her expression suggested she did not believe her. The gate area continued filling with passengers as boarding time approached. Announcements echoed overhead. Rolling suitcases crossed the polished floor. Yet the small crowd surrounding the counter seemed completely focused on one thing. Delaney's situation had become a form of entertainment. Noah shifted uneasily. Something about the interaction felt increasingly unfair. Still, challenging a lead gate agent publicly was not something he felt comfortable doing. He remained silent. "I also have the confirmation email if that helps," Delaney offered. "That will not change what the system shows. Then perhaps it will help identify the error." Chelsea gave a thin smile. "You seem very confident that an error exists." Delaney met her gaze. "I know the reservation is legitimate." That answer only appeared to strengthen Chelsea's certainty. She looked around briefly and seemed to realize how many people were watching. The attention energized her. "Interesting," she said. "Because according to this system, passengers are not supposed to have access to this level of authorization unless very specific conditions have been met." More heads turned toward Delaney. The implication now sounded even more suspicious. Some travelers began openly staring. Others exchanged whispers. Delaney could feel the judgment building around her, yet she remained composed. Then perhaps someone should verify those conditions before making assumptions. For a brief moment, Noah almost smiled. It was the most direct thing Delaney had said all morning. Chelsea's expression hardened. She tapped several keys on the computer, then looked directly at Delaney. "Very well," she said loudly enough for nearby passengers to hear. "If you insist that everything is legitimate, then I would like you to explain to everyone here why your boarding authorization is connected to a category that ordinary passengers never receive." The question immediately drew even more attention. Passengers who had been standing several yards away moved closer. A few people left their seats entirely. What had begun as an unusual boarding issue was quickly becoming the most interesting thing happening at Gate 42. Delaney Brooks remained calm despite the dozens of eyes now fixed on her. "I do not know what category you are referring to," she said. "I only know that I purchased a ticket and received a valid boarding pass." Chelsea Morgan nodded slowly, as though she had expected exactly that answer. "Convenient," she replied. Several nearby travelers exchanged looks. A businessman standing near the priority lane quietly muttered that airline systems did not make mistakes like this. Another passenger suggested that special travel authorizations were usually reserved for executives, government officials, or corporate partners. The speculation spread quickly. Each comment added another layer of suspicion. Delaney listened without reacting. "Perhaps someone from corporate support could verify the reservation," she suggested. "That would resolve this very quickly." Chelsea tapped her keyboard again. "If verification becomes necessary." Her tone implied that she did not believe such a step was required. Nearby, Noah Reynolds continued watching from the customer service area. The situation bothered him more with each passing minute. Delaney's behavior remained remarkably consistent. She answered every question directly. She never raised her voice. She never acted defensive. Yet she was being treated as though she had done something wrong. The contrast was becoming difficult to ignore. Boarding announcements echoed overhead as another flight departed from a neighboring gate. Travelers rolled suitcases across the polished floor. The airport continued operating normally, but around Gate 42 a small audience had effectively formed. Chelsea appeared increasingly comfortable with the attention. She turned her monitor slightly toward herself and reviewed several lines of information. Then something unexpected caught her eye. For the briefest moment, her expression shifted. Not enough for most people to notice. But Noah saw it. So did Delaney. Whatever Chelsea had found only seemed to strengthen her certainty. Interesting, she said quietly. Delaney waited. What is interesting? Nothing that concerns you. The answer immediately drew more whispers from the crowd. Delaney slowly reached into her handbag and removed a slim leather document holder. Would additional identification help? She asked. As she opened it, a small silver card partially slipped from an inner compartment before she returned it inside. The card was visible for less than a second. Most people never noticed it. Noah did. A distinctive silver emblem was engraved near the corner. He recognized it from somewhere, though he could not remember where. The image stayed in his mind. Chelsea ignored the offer entirely. I do not think identification is the issue. Then what is? Delaney asked. Chelsea looked around and seemed to realize just how many people were watching. The attention appeared to encourage her. The issue, she said carefully, is that certain boarding authorizations are not given to ordinary travelers. A hush settled over the surrounding area. Several passengers looked directly at Delaney. Some appeared skeptical. Others looked openly suspicious. The pressure was growing. Every minute that passed made Delaney appear more isolated. Yet she remained composed. Then someone should determine why it was assigned. Chelsea folded her arms. Perhaps. She stepped away from the computer and looked directly at Delaney. Her voice became louder, more public, more deliberate. Before this proceeds any further, she said, ensuring everyone nearby could hear. I think it would be appropriate for you to explain exactly why your reservation appears connected to privileges that you clearly should not have access to. Then she reached toward the boarding scanner and prepared to make the most embarrassing announcement of the morning. The boarding scanner emitted a sharp electronic tone that instantly captured everyone's attention. Chelsea Morgan stepped beside the gate entrance and raised her voice just enough for nearby passengers to hear. This boarding authorization cannot be accepted at this time, she announced. The words echoed through the waiting area. Conversation stopped. Travelers turned their heads. Even people seated several rows away looked up from their phones. Delaney Brooks stood quietly beside the counter, holding her boarding pass while dozens of strangers watched. Chelsea glanced toward the line of passengers waiting to board. We need to keep the boarding process moving, she said. Passengers with verified credentials may proceed. The implication was unmistakable. Delaney was being separated from everyone else. A businessman near the front of the line stepped forward and scanned his pass. Then another passenger followed. Within moments, boarding resumed around her as though she were no longer part of the process. The humiliation was subtle but powerful. People walked past while avoiding eye contact. Some looked sympathetic. Others appeared convinced that Chelsea must be correct. Social judgment had completed its work. Noah Reynolds remained near the customer service station, watching helplessly. He wanted to intervene, but every procedure told him that challenging a lead gate agent in front of passengers was inappropriate. Still, something felt deeply wrong. Delaney had done nothing except ask reasonable questions. Yet she was now being treated as though she did not belong there. Chelsea returned her attention to Delaney. I am going to ask you to step away from the boarding area until this matter can be reviewed. Several passengers heard the statement clearly. A few exchanged uncomfortable glances. Delaney looked toward the aircraft visible through the terminal windows. The jet bridge remained connected. Boarding continued. The flight she had carefully planned to take was leaving without her. Yet remarkably, she showed no anger. No frustration. No resentment. Only quiet disappointment. You are denying me boarding? She asked softly. Until further notice, Chelsea replied. Yes. The surrounding area grew strangely quiet. Even the airport noise seemed distant for a moment. Delaney lowered her boarding pass and looked at Chelsea with calm eyes. Then she said something that caused several people nearby to stop moving entirely. Rules exist to protect fairness, she said. The moment we use them to replace fairness, we stop serving people and start judging them. Her voice was not loud. It did not need to be. The words settled heavily over the gate area. For the first time all morning, Chelsea seemed slightly unsettled. Not because Delaney challenged her authority, but because she did not. There was no argument to defeat, no conflict to win, only dignity. A brief silence followed. Travelers who had been eager to board now appeared thoughtful. Noah felt the truth of her words immediately. Delaney offered a polite nod. "I hope the review goes well," she said. Then she picked up her carry-on suitcase and stepped away from the boarding lane. One by one, people quietly made space for her to pass. Some lowered their eyes. Others watched her walk away with growing uncertainty. Near a large terminal window overlooking the runway, Delaney stopped and sat alone. Aircraft moved slowly across the tarmac beneath a gray morning sky. She looked down at her phone as a notification appeared on the screen. A faint smile crossed her face. At that exact moment, the phone began to ring, and somewhere behind the gate counter, an incoming call alert appeared on Chelsea Morgan's monitor at precisely the same time. Delaney Brooks watched the aircraft through the terminal window as rain clouds drifted slowly beyond the runway. Around her, travelers hurried toward departures, reunions, business meetings, and vacations. The airport remained full of movement, yet for a brief moment, she felt completely still. Her phone rested quietly in her hand. The missed flight should have frustrated her. The public embarrassment should have angered her. Instead, her thoughts returned to the reason this journey mattered so much. 5 years earlier, her father had sat beside her on a porch overlooking a small lake in northern Michigan. It was one of their final conversations before his passing. He had spent his career working long hours as an airline mechanic, often reminding her that every passenger carried a story nobody else could see. "Never forget," he had told her, "that the most important person in the room rarely looks important." Those words had stayed with her ever since. They influenced the way she led companies, the way she treated employees, and the way she viewed strangers. Today was the anniversary of that conversation. The destination waiting for her was not a luxury event or corporate celebration. It was a dedication ceremony for a scholarship foundation she had quietly created in her father's honor. Hundreds of aviation workers and their families had benefited from the program over the years. Very few people knew she was responsible for it. Delaney looked down at a photograph saved on her phone. Her father stood beside an aircraft hangar, smiling beneath a bright summer sky. A gentle smile appeared on her face. "You would have found all of this amusing," she whispered softly. Nearby, Noah Reynolds continued glancing toward her from the customer service area. Eventually, he made a decision. Carrying a small cup of coffee, he approached the seating area. "Excuse me," he said carefully. Delaney looked up. "I thought you might want this." She accepted the cup with genuine appreciation. "Thank you." Noah sat in a nearby chair. "I am sorry about what happened." Delaney shook her head gently. "You do not owe me an apology." "Maybe not," Noah replied. "But it still felt wrong." Delaney studied him for a moment. "The fact that you noticed matters more than you realize." Noah lowered his eyes. "I should have spoken up." "Perhaps," Delaney said kindly. "But courage usually begins with recognizing something is unfair before knowing what to do about it." Noah smiled faintly. The words eased a burden he had been carrying all morning. For several moments they sat quietly. Then Noah remembered the silver emblem he had seen earlier. "That symbol on the card in your document holder," he said. "I know I have seen it somewhere before." Delaney simply smiled without answering. The mystery only deepened. Across the terminal, boarding continued. Passengers disappeared down the jet bridge. Gate announcements echoed overhead. Then something unusual happened. Several airline supervisors emerged from a secure corridor and began moving quickly toward Gate 42. At nearly the same moment, Chelsea Morgan looked up from her terminal after receiving another alert on her screen. Her confident expression suddenly wavered. Nearby employees exchanged confused glances. A low rumble echoed outside as a sleek corporate jet taxied across the distant runway. Then the airport public address system crackled. Briefly, and the atmosphere around Gate 42 changed so abruptly that even the passengers waiting nearby could feel it. The shift was subtle at first, but impossible to ignore. Airline supervisors who rarely appeared on the terminal floor were suddenly moving with purpose toward Gate 42. Their expressions were serious. Their pace was quick. Conversations among employees became shorter, more cautious. Noah Reynolds watched the activity with growing curiosity while Delaney Brooks remained seated by the window, calmly holding her coffee. She appeared almost untouched by the tension spreading through the terminal. At the gate counter, Chelsea Morgan stared at the alert flashing across her monitor. A second notification appeared moments later. Then a third. None of them looked routine. Her confidence began to erode. She glanced toward the seating area where Delaney sat alone. For the first time that morning, uncertainty entered her mind. One of the arriving supervisors approached the counter and quietly spoke to Chelsea. Whatever he said caused her face to lose color. "Are you sure?" she asked. The supervisor nodded immediately. "Completely." Nearby passengers noticed the exchange. The atmosphere changed. People who had previously assumed Delaney was at fault now sensed that something else was happening. The certainty that had fueled their judgments began to fade. Then another figure appeared from the secure corridor. Unlike the others, his arrival immediately attracted attention from airline employees throughout the gate area. Conversations stopped. Staff members straightened their posture. Even supervisors stepped aside to clear a path. Noah recognized him from company publications and industry interviews. Harrison Cole, chairman of the airline group, one of the most respected executives in the aviation industry. His visits to airport terminals were extremely rare. Harrison walked with calm purpose, accompanied by only 2 senior executives. There was no dramatic entrance, no security entourage, no public announcement. Yet his presence alone transformed the atmosphere. Chelsea felt her stomach tighten. Harrison approached the gate counter first. "Where is she?" he asked. The question was direct. No greeting, no small talk. Chelsea hesitated. "Sir." Harrison looked at her steadily. "Delaney Brooks." The name seemed to echo through the terminal. Several nearby passengers exchanged stunned looks. Noah felt his heart race. Harrison was not asking whether Delaney existed. He was asking where she was, as though he had been looking for her. Chelsea slowly pointed toward the window seating area. Harrison immediately turned. The moment he saw Delaney, his expression changed completely. Relief appeared first, then respect. Genuine respect. He walked directly toward her. Delaney stood as he approached. "I apologize for the delay," Harrison said. "I should have arrived sooner." The entire gate area fell silent. Employees stared. Passengers watched openly. No one could believe what they were seeing. The chairman of the airline was apologizing to the woman who had just been denied boarding. Delaney smiled politely. "You seem busy enough already." Harrison shook his head. Not too busy for this. Behind them, Chelsea felt every assumption she had made begin collapsing. The modest clothing, the simple luggage, the quiet demeanor. None of it had meant what she thought it meant. Harrison turned slowly and looked toward the gate counter. Then his gaze settled on Chelsea. The disappointment in his expression was far worse than anger. A hush fell across the terminal. Every employee seemed frozen in place. Harrison spoke only one sentence, but it landed like a weight across the entire room. "Do you have any idea whose flight you just refused to board?" The question seemed to stop time inside the terminal. Nobody answered. The passengers who had spent the last hour quietly judging Delaney Brooks now stared in complete silence. Airline employees stood motionless. Even the boarding process had slowed as people struggled to understand what they were witnessing. Harrison Cole looked from face to face before turning back toward Chelsea Morgan. The gate agent opened her mouth, but no words came out. For the first time that morning, she had no confidence left to hide behind. "No, sir," she admitted quietly. Harrison nodded once. There was no anger in his expression, only disappointment. That much is obvious. Several supervisors exchanged uneasy glances. Delaney remained calm beside the window, showing none of the satisfaction many people would have felt in that moment. Harrison looked toward the crowd. Perhaps it is time everyone understood what happened here. A hush settled across the gate area. Travelers leaned forward. Employees listened carefully. Harrison continued. "Delaney Brooks is the founder and chief executive officer of Brooks Strategic Development." Murmurs immediately spread through the terminal. Several business travelers recognized the name at once. The company was known throughout the transportation industry for transforming struggling operations into successful organizations. But Harrison was not finished. "More importantly," he said, "she is the lead advisor responsible for the modernization initiative currently being implemented across our airline network." The reaction was immediate. Passengers exchanged stunned looks. Employees whispered among themselves. Chelsea felt her stomach sink even further. Every assumption she had made now seemed painfully small. Noah Reynolds suddenly remembered where he had seen the silver emblem. His eyes widened. "The card," he said quietly. Several people looked toward him. "The silver emblem in her document holder." He turned toward Delaney. "It belongs to Brooks Strategic Development." Delaney smiled gently. "Good memory." Noah shook his head in disbelief. The mystery that had troubled him all morning finally made sense. Harrison nodded toward him. "You were paying attention when others were making assumptions." Then Harrison revealed something even more surprising. "There is another reason Delaney was traveling today." The terminal grew quiet again. 5 years ago, after losing her father, she created a scholarship foundation for aviation workers and their families. Several employees looked at one another in shock. Harrison continued. "That foundation has funded educational opportunities, emergency assistance programs, and career advancement initiatives throughout the industry." A supervisor near the gate lowered his head in disbelief. Another employee quietly wiped moisture from her eyes. Many of them knew people whose lives had been changed by those programs. Few had any idea who made them possible. "Most recipients never learned her name," Harrison said, "because she insisted the focus remain on the people receiving help." The words settled heavily across the terminal. Suddenly Delaney appeared very different. Not because of her title, not because of her success, but because of what she had done without seeking recognition. Harrison turned toward Chelsea, but before he could speak, Delaney gently raised her hand. "Please," she said. The entire terminal seemed to listen. "No one needs to be humiliated." The statement surprised everyone. After everything that had happened, she was protecting the dignity of the people who had failed to protect hers. Harrison studied her for a moment and smiled faintly. Noah felt a deep sense of admiration. Even several passengers who had doubted her earlier now looked embarrassed by their assumptions. Something fundamental had changed. The crowd no longer saw a suspicious traveler sitting alone near the window. They saw a leader, a woman who carried influence without displaying it, a woman who chose grace when she had every reason not to. And as the silence settled over Gate 42, the way everyone looked at Delaney Brooks changed completely. For several moments after the revelation, nobody moved. The terminal remained unusually quiet as passengers, employees, and supervisors processed everything they had learned. The woman who had been questioned, doubted, and denied boarding was now standing calmly beside one of the most influential leaders in the airline industry. Yet what impressed people most was not her position. It was her response. Delaney Brooks showed no interest in revenge, no desire to embarrass anyone, no need to prove her importance. Harrison Cole looked around the gate area before addressing the supervisors. "This situation will be reviewed thoroughly," he said, "not because of who was involved, but because the same thing could happen to any passenger." Several employees nodded. The message was clear. The problem was larger than one mistake. It was about culture, judgment, and process. Harrison then turned toward Delaney. "Would you be willing to help us improve that process?" A faint smile appeared on her face. "That has always been the goal." The answer immediately changed the tone of the conversation. Instead of focusing on blame, everyone began discussing solutions. Delaney suggested additional training that emphasized observation before assumption. She recommended clearer verification procedures for unusual travel authorizations. Most importantly, she encouraged employees to remember that professionalism begins with respect. "Every traveler deserves dignity before they earn trust," she said. "Trust can be verified later. Dignity should never be delayed." The statement spread quickly among the employees gathered nearby. Many wrote it down. Others repeated it quietly to themselves. It felt less like a policy recommendation and more like a leadership lesson. Meanwhile, passengers who had watched the situation unfold began approaching Delaney individually. Some apologized for the assumptions they had made. Others thanked her for handling the situation with grace. A businessman who had doubted her earlier extended his hand and admitted he had misjudged her. Delaney accepted every apology with kindness. Across the gate area, Noah Reynolds stood quietly as supervisors discussed the events of the morning. One of them approached him. "We were told you were the first person to recognize that something felt wrong." Noah looked uncomfortable. "I was not brave enough to speak up when I should have." Before the supervisor could respond, Delaney stepped closer. "You paid attention when it mattered," she said. That is where integrity begins. Harrison nodded in agreement. People who care enough to notice problems are often the people who become effective leaders. Noah looked genuinely surprised. By the end of the conversation, he was invited to participate in a new employee leadership development program being created for the airline. The opportunity represented a significant step forward in his career. Yet the recognition meant even more than the promotion itself. It proved that character still mattered. Throughout all of this, Chelsea Morgan remained near the gate counter. She listened quietly as policies were discussed and future improvements were planned. No one shouted at her. No one humiliated her publicly. The absence of punishment somehow made the lesson feel heavier. She watched passengers thanking Delaney. She watched supervisors listening carefully to her ideas. She watched Noah being encouraged because he chose compassion over convenience. Slowly, Chelsea began understanding something she had never fully appreciated before. Authority was not the ability to decide who belonged. Leadership was the responsibility to make people feel they belonged until facts proved otherwise. As boarding preparations resumed and the terminal slowly returned to normal, Chelsea lowered her eyes for a moment and absorbed the deepest lesson of her career. The person she had been quickest to dismiss was the very person who had spent years creating opportunities for people she would never meet. An hour later, the terminal had returned to its familiar rhythm. Boarding announcements echoed through the concourse. Travelers hurried toward departures. Aircraft moved across the runway beneath clearing skies. Yet for the people who had witnessed the events at Gate 42, the morning would not be forgotten. Arrangements were quickly made for Delaney Brooks to reach her destination on another flight. Harrison Cole personally ensured that every detail was handled, but by then the transportation itself no longer mattered. The most important part of the journey was what waited at the other end. Later that afternoon, Delaney arrived at a modest ceremony held inside an aviation training center. There were no television cameras, no luxury decorations, only students, families, mechanics, technicians, and airline workers gathered together to celebrate a scholarship program that had quietly changed lives for years. As she entered the room, several young recipients greeted her warmly. Some were the first members of their families to attend college. Others had completed technical certifications that opened doors to careers they once thought impossible. Looking around the room, Delaney felt the same sense of purpose her father had inspired all those years ago. His photograph stood near the front of the hall beside a simple plaque honoring his dedication to aviation. For a moment, she stood quietly before it. The noise of the world seemed to disappear. She remembered his advice, his kindness, and the belief that every person deserved respect regardless of status. At that moment, despite everything that had happened earlier, she felt at peace. Back at the airport, Chelsea Morgan requested a private meeting before the day ended. When she finally spoke with Delaney through a video call arranged by Harrison, there was no audience and no pressure. Chelsea looked directly into the camera. "I owe you an apology," she said. "Not because of your position, not because of your influence, because I failed to treat you fairly." She paused before continuing. "I made assumptions. I confused authority with judgment. I accept responsibility for that." There were no excuses, no attempts to defend her behavior, only honesty. Delaney listened quietly before offering a gentle smile. "The fact that you recognize it means you can grow from it." Chelsea nodded. The lesson had been painful, but it was real. Meanwhile, Noah Reynolds received official confirmation that he would join the airline's new leadership development initiative. The opportunity changed the course of his career. More importantly, it reinforced something he would carry for the rest of his life. Compassion mattered. Paying attention mattered. Character mattered. Over the following months, new training procedures were introduced across the airline network. Employees received guidance focused not only on policy, but on dignity. Verification processes improved. Communication improved. The culture began improving as well. Small changes created meaningful results. And at the center of those improvements was a lesson born from one difficult morning at a crowded airport gate. As the scholarship ceremony concluded, Delaney stepped outside into the cool evening air. Aircraft crossed the sky overhead, their lights glowing against the horizon. She looked upward and smiled softly. Somewhere, she imagined her father smiling too. The journey had not gone as planned, yet somehow it had arrived exactly where it needed to go. And that day, everyone learned that true importance is not revealed by titles, privileges, or appearances. It is revealed by the respect we choose to give before we know who someone is.